On Friday, October 14th, 2022, at 6:42 p.m., a neighbor walking her dog past a quiet brick home on Sycamore Lane in Dallas, Texas, looked through the open blinds. She caught a glimpse of a family laughing around the dinner table. 23 minutes later, that same neighbor stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring at the same window, now lit with flames. What happened inside during those 23 minutes was something no one in this city can forget, and some wish they never knew. In Texas, summer heat doesn't just press down, it clings. Asphalt shimmers. Air tastes faintly of dust and engine oil. The hum of cicadas fills the background as patrol cars idle outside the constable's office in Travis County. This is where Andre Wells begins his day, the same way he has for the past 8 years. Boots laced tight, badge polished to a mirror, every crease in his uniform sharp enough to cut. Andre, 32, is the kind of officer colleagues remember for his quiet steadiness. He doesn't talk much about the night in 2021 when he pulled 2 children from a barricaded home while a gunman threatened to kill their mother. The department awarded him the Medal of Bravery. He placed it in a desk drawer and never mentioned it again. Then there's Tom Hardben, 38, a sergeant with a voice that carries through any room. The kind of leader who makes rookies straighten their backs when he walks in. 8 years ago, when Andre first put on the uniform, it was Tom Hard who showed him how to navigate the streets, where to find the worst corners, which local store owners would pass along tips, and when to let certain arguments burn themselves out before stepping in. The two men became more than colleagues. They were a fixture in the department. The twins, some said, though one was taller, one quicker with a laugh. On late shifts, they'd sit in a squad car under the dim glow of the dashboard, trading stories over drive-through coffee. They backed each other in tense calls without hesitation. One unspoken rule kept them close. On the street, your partner's life is in your hands, and you never drop it. But bonds between officers aren't forged in ceremonies. They're tested in shadows. Over time, small moments began to surface. Tom Hard's tone snapping sharper than usual after a tense call. Andre's eyes lingering on him just a second too long, as if catching something others missed. It wasn't open conflict, not yet, but the air between them had shifted. Colleagues noticed, though no one dared to ask. And if you had, you might have heard, they're fine. Just brothers arguing. But anyone who's worked a badge long enough knows. Brothers can hurt each other in ways strangers never could. Before the year was out, that shift, invisible to most, would grow into something no one in the department could have imagined. What could happen between two men who once trusted each other with their lives, to make one see the other as the enemy? And there was Irene Wales. By the time Irene Wales turned 27, most people in East Austin knew her name, or at least her smile. She worked the night shift as a nurse aide at a rehab clinic, and she had a way of making even the most stubborn patients finish their soup or take their pills. People said she had old soul, warmth, the kind that made strangers talk like they'd known her for years. But that warmth had a cost. Irene gave so much of herself to others that she rarely kept much for herself. Friends noticed her tendency to keep her own problems quiet, tucked away behind a smile and a soft laugh. She first met Tom Hardben at a community outreach barbecue. He was manning the portable grill, the smoke curling into the humid Texas evening, his forearms glistening from the heat. He offered her a burger with extra pickles, and they ended up talking about everything from jazz records to neighborhood block parties. There was an easy rhythm between them, the kind of connection that feels like it's always been there. Weeks later, fate placed Andre Wells in her path. It was after a minor car accident outside her workplace. Nothing more than dented bumpers and rattled nerves. Andre arrived in uniform, calm and reassuring, his voice low and steady as he took her statement. When he smiled, it was different from Tom Hard's. Not playful, but protective. If you'd asked Irene back then, she would have said each man brought out a different side of her. With Tom Hard, she felt light, playful, unguarded. With Andre, she felt safe, grounded, almost shielded from the world. It should have been simple. It wasn't. Some of her friends warned her, not about either man in particular, but about the overlap. They told her that hearts, unlike calendars, couldn't keep appointments. She brushed it off with a laugh, telling them life was too short for hard rules. But the truth was, even she had begun to feel the weight of her own choices. The late-night calls she didn't mention. The texts she deleted. The way her stomach tightened when she saw one man's name while sitting beside the other. When two people make you feel complete in different ways, is it love, or is it a collision waiting to happen? And when the collision comes, who walks away without scars? The overlap began quietly, so quietly that even the people closest to them didn't notice. At first, it was only shadows, a delay in returning a call, a shift in tone over the radio, a lingering glance when Irene's name came up. But the signs began stacking. One of Andre's friends remembered the first time he saw it. Andre, normally quick to laugh, sitting in the break room with his phone tilted away from view, thumb moving fast, a faint smirk on his face. "You texting Irene?" the friend asked. Andre didn't answer, just locked the screen. Weeks later, Tom Hard's partner noticed him in the patrol car, tapping out a message during a routine stakeout, his expression unusually focused. The name on the notification banner was Irene. By then, the pattern was forming. Missed calls to friends, sudden schedule changes, and unexplained absences on nights they were off duty. Detectives, looking back, would later call it the drift. Two men, unknowingly walking the same road toward the same woman, until the road narrowed and one would have to step aside or force the other off entirely. The messages were time-stamped within minutes of each other. Andre texting, "You up?" at 11:42 p.m., and Tom Hard sending, "Don't fall asleep yet," at 11:47 p.m. The locations on their personal phones told their own story. Two vehicles passing near Irene Street within hours of each other. But at the time, no one connected the dots. Psychologically, this was dangerous terrain. In law enforcement, competition isn't unusual, but in matters of the heart, it becomes personal, territorial. For men trained to assert control and read threats, the idea that another officer was sharing intimate space with the same woman would cut deeper than any insult. It wasn't just about affection. It was about pride, image, and the unspoken hierarchy among their peers. One retired officer, reflecting on the case, put it plainly. Two cops in love with the same woman? That's a powder keg, and nobody thinks they're the one who's going to get burned. Then came the night that tipped the balance. Andre was off duty, halfway through a late dinner at a small diner, when his phone lit up. The message was short, urgent. "Please, can you come over? It's important." Her choice of words, please and important, wasn't something she used often. Andre excused himself, tossed some bills on the counter, and stepped into the cool night air. He didn't know that Tom Hard was already there. From across the street, Tom Hard's truck sat angled just beyond the glow of the streetlight, the faint hum of its cooling engine still ticking under the hood. Inside Irene's apartment, the curtains were drawn, but the silhouette of two figures moved in the yellow light. Andre's Uber rolled up, tires hissing against damp asphalt. The driver glanced back, catching the tightness in Andre's jaw as he scanned the building. On the second-floor balcony, the faint shape of a man shifted behind the glass. And for a split second, it seemed like the man was looking directly at him. What happens when the door Andre is about to knock on opens to reveal the man he didn't know he was competing against? Both of them armed, both of them in love, and one of them already inside. The Uber driver would later say Andre barely spoke during the ride. No small talk, no questions, just a man staring out of the city with a jaw so tight you could see the muscle twitch in his cheek. Streetlights flickered across his face like passing flashes of memory, images he didn't ask for, but couldn't stop. In his lap, his phone buzzed once, then again. He didn't check it. The car turned down a quieter street, where the buildings stood older, the walls weathered. Andre's eyes locked on a single window, lit in a warm, soft glow, the kind of light people use to feel safe inside. The driver stopped. "We're here." Andre stepped out into the chill. He climbed 3 flights of stairs that smelled faintly of old carpet and fried food. his footsteps slow but steady. Each step was a countdown. At the end of the hallway, apartment 3B, a strip of light seeped from under the door, and somewhere inside, faint music. Not just any song. An old slow jam, one Irene used to play on Sundays when the two of them would dance in the kitchen, back when everything still felt unshakable. He knocked. The door opened. Tom Hart stood there. A half-smile lifted one corner of his mouth, but his eyes told a different story. The two men didn't speak. They didn't have to. The air between them was already heavy with things neither wanted to admit. Andre's gaze flicked over Tom Hart's shoulder. Shadows stretched long across the living room floor. On the coffee table, two glasses. One nearly empty, the other still sweating cold. Somewhere deeper in the apartment, a bedroom door closed softly. The click was delicate, but in Andre's mind, it was deafening. Neither man moved. Tom Hart leaned against the doorframe, just enough to block the way. Andre took in the room, the air, the scent of someone's perfume. Hers. The same one that used to linger on his pillow. His hands curled into fists without him realizing. This wasn't just walking into a room. This was stepping onto a fault line that had been cracking beneath his life for months. And tonight, it had finally split open. If you walked in and knew, without question, that someone you trusted had crossed a line you could never uncross, would you try to walk away? Or would you step forward, knowing the moment your foot landed, there'd be no going back? Would you be willing to fight for a woman? The third-floor balcony was barely 6 feet across, hemmed in by a railing that had seen better years. Paint blistered from summer heat, rust biting at the joints. From the ground, it stood 32 feet above the asphalt, a drop most wouldn't survive without broken bones, if they survived at all. Inside, the apartment layout was compact, living room spilling into a kitchen, sliding glass door leading out to that balcony. It was the only space in the home where the night air could carry every sound into the courtyard below. A neighbor later told investigators she'd been watching television when she heard it. A man's voice, tight and rising, the kind you know is seconds from breaking. Then a crash, like furniture being shoved, followed by a silence so sudden it made her mute the TV. She moved her window just in time to hear it. A single, heavy thud. She said the sound was thick, as if it didn't bounce or echo. It just stayed. Forensic teams arrived hours later, photographing every inch of the balcony. They measured the railing, 3 feet, 4 inches high, just enough for an average man to clear if he leaned too far over. They took swabs from the metal, searching for skin cells or fingerprints, anything that could tell them how a living man had crossed that threshold into the dark void below. In the reconstruction, detectives didn't just rely on measurements. They stood on that balcony themselves, replaying each possible sequence. A stumble during a heated argument, a desperate shove, or a grip broken in the struggle. Witnesses from the courtyard were brought in to describe how his body landed. Face down, arms tucked unnaturally, as if he hadn't braced for impact. But there was one detail investigators didn't release publicly. Not yet. A faint smear on the inside of the railing, barely visible without forensic light. Too low to be from a hand reaching over. Too high to be from a foot. Was that mark the silent testimony of a man fighting to stay on the balcony, or of someone making sure he never did? The late afternoon light was fading when the arrest began. Yellow tape flapped in short, frantic bursts with each gust of wind. Patrol lights washed the street in cold blues and reds, their rhythmic pulse reflecting off rain-slick asphalt. Inside the cordon, the crime scene was still active. Detectives crouched over evidence markers, their voices low, clipped, urgent. But just a few yards away, another scene was unfolding. 2 uniformed officers stepped toward Detective Tom Hart. No one rushed. No one shouted. In a police department, the arrest of one of their own was rare enough to feel like an earthquake. The usual commands, "Hand behind your back, sir," were replaced by an unspoken, heavier language. Avoiding each other's eyes, fingers tightening slightly on the handcuffs, the smallest hesitation before the click of steel. Tom Hart's jaw worked in silence. He didn't protest. But his eyes didn't stay still. They darted once toward the nearby media vans, then quickly away, as if refusing to feed the story already being written. His breathing deepened, slow but measured, the kind of self-control that comes from knowing every move is being watched and recorded. Across the lot, Irene was escorted toward an unmarked sedan for questioning. She didn't cry. She didn't look confused. Instead, her lips pressed into a tight, unnatural smile when she caught sight of Tom Hard's arrest, like she had already rehearsed a version of this moment in her mind. The officers flanking her exchanged a brief, uneasy glance. From the perimeter, voices rose. It wasn't just camera shutters snapping. It was neighbors muttering. Thought he was one of the good ones. The low hum of gossip fused with the click of cameras, turning the block into a stage. Every sound carried the sharp edge of betrayal. Then, through the crowd, a sudden movement, a woman breaking past the barricade. Andre's mother. She didn't run so much as force her way forward, her hands trembling before she even reached the tape. An officer stepped in, but she pushed through, eyes locked on the patch of pavement where her son's body lay under a white sheet. Her voice cracked. Once, she dropped to her knees, hands open, palms up, as though expecting her son to reach back from the other side. An officer crouched beside her, murmuring words the wind immediately carried away. By nightfall, headlines would flash across local news sites. Detective arrested in connection with fatal shooting. Love triangle rumors surface, an officer-involved death. The official statements were short. The speculation was not. A badge can grant authority. It can grant trust. But should it grant immunity from the very laws it enforces? He was the first in his family to wear a badge. His mother still kept the photograph from his graduation at the police academy. The proud smile, the crisp uniform, the way he stood a little taller than the rest of his class. To his community, Andre wasn't just Officer Mason. He was the man who would change a stranger's flat tire in the rain. The man who quietly paid for groceries when a single mother came up short at the register. The man who remembered every kid's name on his beat. But dedication came at a cost. The job consumed his time, his energy, and, eventually, his personal life. His last serious relationship ended with a quiet, tired breakup over takeout containers in their small apartment. She told him she loved him, but she was tired of feeling like a shadow in his life. He didn't argue. He couldn't promise he'd be home any more than before. He just nodded, and she walked out with the last box of her things. Friends noticed something about Andre. He could carry other people's burdens, but he never shared his own. His colleagues respected him, but none of them knew the weight he carried from seeing things no one should have to see. He went to work, went home, and kept his private world locked away. Then, somewhere along the line, Irene's name appeared in that private world. At first, she was just another contact in his phone, a name buried between work numbers and emergency contacts. But when investigators later traced his call history, they found her name popping up months earlier than anyone had realized. Quiet, unremarkable calls at first, then more frequent ones, then messages at all hours of the night. From the outside, Tom Hard fit the mold of a decorated officer, broad-shouldered, sharp in his uniform, and walking with the kind of rigid posture that only comes from years of military service. He'd spent 8 years in the National Guard before making the leap to the Dallas Police Department, a transition he liked to describe as trading one battlefield for another. Former colleagues from his Guard unit remember him as someone who pushed himself and everyone around him beyond the point of exhaustion. If you fell behind on a march, one said, he'd be the first to yell in your ear, but he'd also be the first to grab your pack and haul it the last mile with you. That mix of grit and unpredictable temper became his calling card. When he joined the force, Tom Hard's rise was swift. He racked up commendations for drug busts, hostage negotiations, and street arrests. His locker was a mosaic of commendation bars and faded photos from missions past. But inside his personnel file, there were shadows. 2 formal reprimands, both for verbal aggression toward fellow officers. The first was after a tense morning briefing where a rookie challenged his tactics. Tom Hard, according to witnesses, stepped so close the younger officer's chair scraped backward. His voice, low but sharp enough to cut, forced the room into silence. The second incident came during a late-night stakeout, when a fellow detective questioned whether the suspect would even show. Tom Hard's reply was so heated, the commanding officer had to send him home. By the time the second reprimand landed in his file, his marriage had already started to unravel. 2 years before the events of this case, his wife filed for divorce. Friends say she'd grown tired of the unpredictable mood swings, the long hours, and the way Tom Hard seemed to carry the day's fights home like invisible baggage. Their teenage son, Marcus, had once idolized him, polishing his father's boots before inspection days, standing on the porch to wave when the patrol car pulled up. But after the divorce, the distance between them widened. Marcus stopped calling back. Birthdays passed with short, stilted conversations over the phone. Tom Hard, according to one neighbor, would sometimes sit in his truck outside his ex-wife's house for half an hour without knocking. Inside the department, he was known as fiercely competitive. Whether it was a bench press contest in the gym or a tactical exercise on the range, losing wasn't an option. He could make catching a jaywalker feel like a championship game, another officer said. It was this same drive, this need to outmaneuver, that seemed to spill over into his personal life. Those closest to him suggest that what fueled Tom Hard wasn't just a sense of justice. It was the thrill of coming out on top. You could give him a puzzle, a chessboard, or a murder case, one former partner explained. The part he liked most wasn't solving it. It was proving he could beat the other guy to it. But pride has its own gravitational pull. And when the case that would change everything landed in his lap, Tom Hard's motives became harder to read. Was it love? Or was it the irresistible lure of winning at any cost? And if it was the latter, what exactly did he think he was winning? Irene was born in Fort Worth, Texas, in the back bedroom of a weathered 2-story home that smelled faintly of cedar and mothballs. Raised almost entirely by her grandmother, Irene grew up learning how to make ends meet with little more than resourcefulness and an iron will. At 19, she moved to Dallas for work. Her grandmother told her, "Baby, the city gives you everything you want, but it'll take twice as much back if you're not careful." Those words would echo years later in ways no one could have predicted. When detectives sat her down in the interview room, a gray box with a buzzing fluorescent light that hummed in the background, Irene was calm, almost rehearsed. She said she had never been officially with either man at the same time. According to her, Andre was part of her past. Tom Hard was her present. "I ended one thing before starting another," she told the lead investigator, her voice low and deliberate, hands folded neatly on the table. But there was a problem. Investigators already had her phone records spread across the table between them. The timeline didn't match her story. Andre's number and Tom Hard's number overlapped, sometimes within minutes, day after day in the weeks leading up to the incident. One detective slid a printed text message across the table toward her. It was from Irene to a friend, dated 3 days before the fall. "I can't keep this up much longer." She didn't flinch, but her gaze dropped briefly toward her lap before returning to the detective. "That was about work," she insisted. "Too many shifts. Too much stress. That's all." Dallas PD's cyber unit had already pulled cell tower data. On one night, in particular, just 48 hours before Andre's fall, Irene's phone pinged off a tower less than a mile from Andre's apartment at 1:17 a.m. When asked why she was there, she leaned back, exhaled, and said, "I was dropping something off. That's it." But the same records showed her phone remained in the area until almost 3 a.m. And 2 minutes after leaving, she sent Andre a message that read, "Just remember what we talked about." The friend who received the "I can't keep this up" text told investigators something else. Irene had been juggling both men, afraid that if either found out, it would get messy. The friend described Irene's tone as edgy that week, snapping at small things, avoiding eye contact during conversations, and compulsively checking her phone. Back in the interview room, Irene's composure began to wear thin. She crossed and uncrossed her legs. Her left hand gripped the armrest, nails tapping in short bursts. The lead detective leaned in. What exactly couldn't you keep up? She stared at him for a long moment before saying softly, time for what? To end one relationship? To start something new? Or to put a plan in motion? The investigators didn't have the answer yet, but they were beginning to think Irene's truth was only the opening layer of something much darker. The investigation moved from speculation to precision. From the moment Andre's body was wheeled into the coroner's suite, every inch of him became a silent witness. Under the unforgiving light, the medical examiner's report unfolded a truth more brutal than the fall itself. Multiple fractures, wrist, collarbone, ribs. Severe cranial trauma consistent with a high-impact collision. And yet, no alcohol, no sedatives, no trace of recreational drugs. Andre's system was as clean as the day he graduated college. The absence of intoxication sharpened the edges of the case. If he wasn't impaired, how had he fallen? And why did the injuries suggest more than just a single accidental drop? The digital trail came next. Detectives moved through Andre's last night like archivists combing through an ancient scroll. Phone records showed a final outgoing call at 11:42 p.m., a brief one, under 40 seconds, to Irene's cell. GPS data from the Uber placed the car outside Irene's apartment. At precisely 11:56 p.m., security cameras from a nearby deli confirmed his arrival. Andre appears in the corner of the frame, hands in pockets, glancing over his shoulder. By 12:03 a.m., the Uber was gone, and Andre was inside the building. Inside the interrogation room, the air seemed to grow heavier with each question. Tom Hard sat across from two detectives, a styrofoam cup of coffee untouched in front of him. The overhead fluorescent hummed, buzzing faintly, a sound that filled the silences between his words. He started with confidence, recounting the night in broad, even strokes. But when pressed on the moment Andre fell, the edges of his memory began to fray. First, he said Andre slipped while leaning on a balcony rail. Minutes later, it became he tripped while stepping outside. And finally, he just went over. Each shift was small, but the detectives marked every one of them, their pens moving in perfect unison. Then came the unexpected turn. Late on a Tuesday afternoon, a detective's desk phone lit up. The voice on the other end was male, mid-40s by the sound of it, calm, but carrying an undercurrent of urgency. He claimed to have been in Irene's building that night. Claimed he heard shouting. Something about money owed, and you shouldn't have come here. The caller didn't leave a name, only hanging up after saying, check his balcony. You'll see it's not what it looks like. The prosecutors wasted no time. Assistant District Attorney Rivers called for a closed-door meeting with the lead investigators. When the door shut, Rivers placed a manila folder on the table. It was thick, stuffed with printed images, typed notes, and what looked like a flash drive clipped inside. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she let the weight of it sit there, her fingertips resting lightly on the cover. Her voice was even when she said, "We've been patient, but I think it's time you both see this." The detectives leaned forward, hearts thudding in quiet sync. Whatever was in that folder, it wasn't just evidence. It was the piece that could break the case, or rip it wide open in ways none of them were ready for. For weeks, the investigation had built its case brick by brick. But inside that folder was something no one had prepared for, something that would turn a suspected accident into a question of intent. And someone in that room already knew what it meant. The morning of his arrest was eerily quiet. No sirens, no shouting, just the low hum of a police SUV idling at the curb. Neighbors stood behind half-closed blinds, some filming on their phones, as two plainclothes detectives approached Tom Hard's front door. He opened it halfway, barefoot, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt. His face flickered between confusion and resignation, as though a part of him had been rehearsing this moment in the mirror for months. The detective read the charge, second-degree murder, with the same steady cadence one might use to recite a weather report. Tom Hard didn't resist. He simply turned his wrists outward, palms down, making it easier for the steel cuffs to slide over them. A neighbor muttered under her breath, "Finally." Months later, The trial began inside a downtown courthouse under bright autumn skies. By dawn, the steps were crowded, reporters adjusting microphones, onlookers clutching paper cups of coffee. Inside, the gallery overflowed. Family members of both men sat on opposite sides, a silent river of grief running between them. Tom Hard entered in a dark suit, shoulders squared but jaw tight, escorted by 2 deputies. Irene sat near the front, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles blanched. The lead prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, told the jury that this was no accident. She painted a picture of jealousy simmering long before that night. "You will see," she promised, "that this was an intentional act, a push born out of betrayal, not a stumble born out of chaos." They showed jurors surveillance timestamps, phone records, and GPS trails from the Uber ride, threading them together with the autopsy's grim findings. Multiple fractures, severe head trauma, and a timeline that left little room for doubt. The Uber driver testified first, his voice steady, but eyes downcast. He described dropping the men off, hearing the tone of their argument shift, and glancing in the rearview mirror to see Andre's expression, tight-lipped, jaw set. The defense attorney rose slowly, buttoning his jacket as though buying himself time. His tone was deliberate, almost fatherly. "This was a tragedy," he began, "but it was a tragedy born in the heat of the moment, during a struggle between 2 men who were both pushing, both pulling." He emphasized that no one could truly know what happened in those seconds before the fall. He reminded jurors of Andre's athletic build, the narrowness of the ledge, the chaos of human emotion. Neighbors testified about hearing raised voices. Forensic experts dissected the physics of a fall from that height. The lead detective walked jurors through each photograph. Andre's body at the base of the building, the scuff marks on the railing, the absence of defensive injuries on Tom Hard's hands. Then came Irene. She walked to the stand with deliberate steps, avoiding Tom Hard's gaze. The courtroom seemed to inhale as the prosecutor asked her first question. Her lip trembled, and when she finally spoke, her voice cracked, not from weakness, but from the weight of choosing each word. She recounted the weeks leading up to the night, the shifting tone in Tom Hard's texts, the moments when Andre had confided in her. When asked if she believed Tom Hard pushed Andre intentionally, she didn't look at him. "Yes," she said. A murmur rippled through the gallery. The judge's gavel cracked the air back into order. After closing arguments, the judge instructed the jury. 12 strangers filed out of the room, disappearing into the deliberation chamber with the weight of 2 lives pressing against the door behind them. The jury room had been sealed for nearly 48 hours. No cameras, no microphones, only the faint scrape of chairs and the soft thud of a water pitcher setting down in the hallway outside. Every so often, the door would open just enough for the bailiff to slip in and out, retrieving questions scribbled on yellow pads, returning with a stack of transcripts, or delivering coffee in paper cups. From the gallery, the waiting felt like punishment in itself. Andre's mother sat in the same position she had been in for both days, her fingers threaded together, lips moving silently in prayer. Tom Hard's sister sat farther back, arms folded, eyes fixed on the polished wood of the jury box, never once glancing toward the prosecution's table. By mid-afternoon on the second day, the air in the courtroom felt thicker. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Lawyers pretended to organize files, but were really watching the doors. Even the court reporter, trained to remain still, shifted in her seat. At 3:41 p.m., the bailiff appeared. "The jury has reached a verdict." A ripple went through the gallery. Nothing loud, just a shift in posture, like the room inhaling at once. They filed in slowly. No smiles, no tears, just 12 faces that looked older than they had 2 days ago. The foreperson, a middle-aged man in a navy suit, avoided meeting anyone's eyes. The judge's voice was steady. "Madam Clerk, will you read the verdict?" The foreperson handed over the folded paper. The sound of it unfolding seemed louder than it should have been. "S. In the matter of the state of Texas versus Tom Hard Ben, on the charge of second-degree murder, We find the defendant guilty. The words landed like a stone dropped into deep water. No splash, just a sinking finality. Andre's mother pressed a hand over her mouth. A muffled sound escaped, a mixture of sob and gasp. Her eldest daughter reached for her, steadying her, as if the verdict had physical weight. On the other side of the courtroom, Tom Hard didn't flinch. He sat upright, eyes fixed on the space just above the judge's head. But the tightening at his jaw, the slow inhale through his nose, betrayed a man trying to keep control. Was it disbelief? Was it fury? Or was it the first moment he truly understood that this was the end? The judge didn't waste words. The guidelines were clear. For the charge of second-degree murder, the court hereby sentences you to 25 years in the custody of the Texas Department of Corrections. There was no audible reaction from Tom Hard, but his sister leaned forward, whispering his name once, like she might wake him from a bad dream. As deputies moved in, the chains rattled softly. They didn't grip his arms roughly, but the hold was firm. Tom Hard stood, still looking straight ahead, and walked the aisle without glancing back at his family, or at Andre's. In the third row, Irene, his former girlfriend and one of the trial's most reluctant witnesses, rose and left quietly before the media could swarm her. No words, no expression, just a quick retreat down the hallway. As Tom Hard was loaded into the waiting transport van, the heavy steel door slammed shut with a metallic finality. Through the narrow, barred window, his eyes caught the crowd for a fraction of a second, then disappeared as the vehicle pulled away. Justice had been pronounced, but in the silence that followed, a question lingered. Was 25 years enough to balance a life stolen, or was this just another chapter in a cycle that would never truly end?